Look, nobody can predict the future with 100% certainty. If they could, they'd be chilling on a yacht shaped like a golden goose, not awkwardly explaining economic indicators on YouTube. But that being said, there are some signs, some economic tea leaves if you will, that suggest 2025 be a bit bumpy. Now, I'm not talking about missing your avocado toast bumpy. I'm talking about full-blown, should I invest in a fallout shelter and a lifetime supply of ramen noodles? Bumpy. And while panicking never helped anyone, being prepared? Well, that's just good sense. So buckle up, Buttercup, because today we're diving headfirst into the murky waters of economic indicators to give you the lowdown on 20 signs that suggest 2025 might be the year the economic wheels fall off. The stock market. It's that magical place where numbers go up and down like a hyperactive toddler on a trampoline and nobody really understands why. But here's the thing, when the stock market gets the sniffles, the rest of us tend to get the flu. Think of it like this, the stock market is basically a giant mood ring for the economy. When investors are feeling optimistic, the market goes up. When they're feeling pessimistic, it goes down faster than a Kardashian marriage. So if you start seeing major fluctuations, sudden drops, or just a general sense of unease in the market, it might be time to break out the economic hand sanitizer. Remember that old saying, the more the merrier? Yeah, that doesn't apply to unemployment lines. See, when unemployment rates start creeping up, it's like a canary in an economic coal mine. More people out of work means less spending, which means businesses suffer, which means even people out of work. It's a vicious cycle that can spiral out of control faster than you can say, government bailout. So keep an eye on those unemployment figures, folks. They're a pretty good barometer of which way the economic winds are blowing. Consumer confidence is a fancy way of saying how optimistic people feel about the economy. Are they confident enough to buy that new car, book that vacation, or splurge on that pair of shoes they definitely don't need? When consumer confidence is high, the economy thrives, but when it plummets, well, let's just say it's like someone hit the pause button on spending, and nobody's quite sure when or if it'll start back up again. So, if you start noticing people tightening their belts and holding onto their wallets a little tighter, it might be a sign that the economic party is winding down. Manufacturing is the backbone of any economy. It's where we take raw materials and turn them into shiny new things that we probably don't need but definitely want. But when factories start slowing down production, or worse, shutting down altogether, it's a clear indication that something is amiss. Think of it like this, if the factory floor is quiet, it likely means the economy is about to get a whole lot louder. So keep an ear to the ground for news about factory closures, production cuts, and general manufacturing malaise. It's not a good sign, folks. Debt. It's the four-letter word that nobody wants to talk about, but everyone seems to have. A little bit of debt can be manageable, even helpful. But when debt levels start to skyrocket, it's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Think about it. Too much debt means individuals, businesses, and even governments have less money to spend on other things. And when spending dries up, well, so does the economy. So, keep an eye on those debt-to-income ratios, folks. They're a pretty good indicator of whether we're headed for a soft landing or a crash landing. Ah, the housing market. It's that magical place where people pour their life savings into a mortgage and hope for the best. But when the housing market takes a nosedive, it can take the entire economy down with it. Think back to 2008. Remember the subprime mortgage crisis? Yeah, nobody wants a repeat of that. So, if you start seeing housing prices plummet, foreclosures rise, and for sale signs popping up like dandelions after a spring rain, it might be time to reinforce your economic bunker. Remember that scene in It's a Wonderful Life where everyone rushes to the bank to withdraw their money? Yeah, that's a bank run, and it's about as fun as it sounds. Banks are built on trust. When people lose trust in banks, they panic. And when people panic, they withdraw their money en masse, which can lead to, you guessed it, economic disaster. So, while bank runs are relatively rare these days, they're not unheard of. If you start hearing whispers of a bank run, well, you might want to consider keeping a little extra cash on hand. Retail therapy. It's the cure for what ails you, or at least that's what the credit card companies want you to think. But when retail sales start to slump, it's a sign that consumers are either tapped out or terrified, neither of which is good for the economy. Think about it, retail sales are a direct reflection of consumer spending, and consumer spending accounts for a whopping 70% of the US economy. So, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. If you start noticing more for lease signs than now hiring signs at your local mall, it might be time to start clipping those coupons. Inflation. It's like that annoying friend who invites themselves over, eats all your food, and then has the audacity to stay longer than you want them to. Except in this case, the friend is rising prices, and they're eating away at your purchasing power. A little bit of inflation is normal. But when prices start rising faster than your salary, it's a recipe for economic indigestion. Suddenly, that morning latte costs $12, and you're questioning your life choices. So, keep an eye on the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation. If it starts to look more like a roller coaster than a gentle slope, it might be time to invest in a good pair of running shoes. Businesses are a lot like toddlers. They need constant investment to grow and thrive, but when businesses get spooked, they tend to do what toddlers do best: throw a tantrum and hoard their toys. In economic terms, this means businesses stop investing in new projects, hiring new employees, and generally contributing to the economy. It's like hitting the pause button on economic growth, and nobody wants that. So, if you start seeing businesses tightening their purse strings and putting expansion plans on hold, it might be a sign that the economic playground is about to get a lot less fun. Remember that game of Jenga you played where one wrong move sent the whole tower toppling down? That's kind of what loan defaults are like for the economy. See, when people can't repay their loans, it creates a ripple effect. Banks lose money, which makes them less likely to lend to other people, which slows down the economy, which makes it even harder for people to repay their loans. It's a vicious cycle that can quickly spiral out of control. So if you start hearing about rising loan defaults, especially in key areas like mortgages or auto loans, it's a sign that the economic Jenga tower might be getting a little wobbly. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a fancy way of measuring the total value of everything produced within a country's borders. Think of it like the economy's report card. When GDP is growing, it means the economy is healthy and thriving. But when GDP growth slows down, or worse, contracts, it's a sign that we're in trouble. Imagine a car running out of gas. It might keep coasting for a little while, but eventually it's going to come to a grinding halt. That's kind of what happens when GDP growth stalls. The economy might sputter along for a bit, but eventually it's going to hit a wall. Remember that feeling of dread when you open your credit card bill and realize you spent way more than you intended? Now imagine that feeling multiplied by a gazillion. That's what it's like to be the government dealing with a mountain of debt. See, governments borrow money all the time to fund things like infrastructure projects, social programs, and of course, tax cuts for billionaires. A little bit of debt is manageable, but when government debt spirals out of control, it can lead to higher interest rates, inflation, and a whole host of other economic woes. So, keep an eye on that national debt clock. It's a stark reminder of the financial burden we're passing down to future generations. Commodities. They're the building blocks of, well, everything. Oil, gold, copper, wheat, coffee, you name it, we need it. And when the prices of these raw materials start to plummet, it's usually a sign that something is amiss in the global economy. Think of it like this: when demand for goods and services is high, commodity prices tend to rise. But when demand dries up, prices fall faster than a lead balloon. So, if you start noticing a steep decline in commodity prices, it could be a sign that the global economy is heading for a slump. Corporate profits, they're the lifeblood of capitalism. When businesses are raking in the dough, everyone's happy. But when profits start to dwindle, it's a sign that the economic engine is sputtering. Think of it like this: when businesses are profitable, they invest in new projects, hire more workers, and generally contribute to economic growth. But when profits decline, businesses tighten their belts, lay off workers, and generally make life miserable for everyone. So, if you start seeing a consistent decline in corporate profits, especially in key industries, it's a sign that the economic outlook might be cloudier than a politician's promise. Chapter 16. Interest rate hikes. the economic hangover you didn't ask for. Interest rates. They're like that friend who's fun to hang out with at first, but then, they overstay their welcome and start eating all your food. When interest rates are low, it's like a party for borrowers. Mortgages, car loans, and credit card debt are all relatively cheap and easy to come by. But when interest rates start to rise, the party's over. Suddenly, that monthly payment is a lot harder to swallow and the economy starts to feel the pinch. Think of it like this. Higher interest rates make it more expensive to borrow money, which slows down investment and spending. Chapter 17. Exports. When selling stuff overseas isn't so easy anymore. Exports. They're the economic equivalent of trading your extra sandwich for your friend's bag of chips. Everyone wins. When a country exports goods and services, it brings in money from other countries, which boosts the economy. But when exports start to decline, it's a sign that other countries might be struggling, or that our goods and services are about to be hit with some hefty tariffs. Think of it like this. If other countries aren't buying our stuff, it means they have less money to spend, which weakens their economies, which ultimately hurts us too. It's a global game of economic hot potato, and nobody wants to be left holding the bag. Remember that time you went on a shopping spree and maxed out your credit card? Fun times, right? Well, that's kind of what a trade deficit is like, except on a much larger scale. A trade deficit occurs when a country imports more goods and services than it exports. In other words, we're buying more stuff from other countries than we're selling to them. And while a little bit of a trade deficit isn't necessarily a bad thing, a persistent and growing trade deficit can be a sign of underlying economic problems. Think of it like this. If we're constantly buying more than we're selling, it means we're sending more money out of the country than we're bringing in. Consumer spending. It's the engine that drives the economy. When people are out there buying things, businesses thrive, jobs are created, and everyone's happy. But when consumer spending starts to sputter, it's like throwing a wrench in the economic gears. Suddenly businesses are struggling to sell their products, workers are getting laid off, and the economy grinds to a halt. Think of it like this. Consumer spending is like the fuel that keeps the economic engine running. When we stop spending, the engine starts to sputter, and eventually it comes to a grinding halt. Poverty. It's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but it's an issue that affects millions of people around the world. And when poverty rates start to rise, it's a sign that something is seriously wrong with our economic system. Think of it like this. Poverty is a symptom of a deeper economic malaise. It's a sign that the system isn't working for everyone, that the gap between the rich and the poor is widening, and that too many people are being left behind. So, if you start seeing more people struggling to make ends meet, more families relying on food banks, and more children living in poverty, it's a sign that we need to rethink our priorities and start building a more just and equitable society. So, there you have it, folks. 20 signs that the economic apocalypse might be nigh. But before you start hoarding canned goods and building a bunker in your backyard, remember this: nobody can predict the future with 100% certainty. The economy is a complex and constantly evolving beast. Trying to predict its every move is like trying to herd cats while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. It's not easy, and it's probably going to end in disaster. But that doesn't mean we should just throw our hands up in defeat and resign ourselves to a future of economic uncertainty. By being aware of the warning signs, making informed decisions, and maybe investing in a really good financial planner, we can weather the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Or, at least we can try.